This is as delicious as a bowl of Martha Stewart's one-pot pasta. Yes, the lifestyle genius has just scored the ultimate revenge on a certain Meghan Markle, brutally exposing her, ironically, via the Sussex propaganda organ People magazine, as being a big fat gossip of breaking all of those private agreements that Prince Harry had made with King Charles.
I think it's actually kind of cool that Martha Stewart, who's now in her 80s, she just doesn't give an F, Glenn. She's like, I'm gonna cut this bitch and I don't care if you don't like it. She's clearly mocking her.
I don't think she respects the fact that Meghan Markle is a worthy competitor of everything Martha Stewart has done.
What if the most explosive detail about that private royal meeting did not come from the palace, did not come from an official statement, and did not even come from the people who were actually inside Highgrove, but instead escaped across a California dinner table, where Martha Stewart barely exchanged more than a few words with Meghan Markle and somehow still walked away knowing enough to make the entire situation look deeply uncomfortable? That is the controversy hiding in plain sight, because this was supposed to be private, quiet, controlled, yet somehow the conversation followed Meghan Markle all the way back across the Atlantic into a room filled with people and straight toward one woman who happened to have her own connection to King Charles. Martha Stewart sat at that dinner table, apparently spoke almost nothing directly to her, and still emerged with the detail everyone is now dissecting. And when those comments landed in People magazine, suddenly what looked like harmless celebrity chatter began feeling like something far more revealing. Then the conversation moved into even more dangerous territory because Martha Stewart was asked about Meghan's cooking show, about Meghan stepping into the lifestyle world that Martha Stewart spent decades turning into an empire. And the response was not some screaming celebrity feud or theatrical attack. It was colder than that, controlled, almost surgical. The kind of response where the absence of drama becomes the drama, because instead of treating Meghan like a terrifying new competitor, Martha Stewart appeared to question the entire transition itself. Actress, royal, homemaking personality. Those identities were suddenly sitting beside each other under an unforgiving spotlight. And the implication was difficult to ignore. Does that journey actually make sense? And that was essentially it. No giant public statement. No furious war through representatives. No endless explanation designed to soften what had been said. Just a few sentences delivered with enough restraint that everyone else was left to stare at what appeared to be sitting on the table. Then came the silence. 3 days passed while the story spread, and the woman at the center of it appeared to carry on as though nothing had happened. But silence in a story like this does not necessarily kill speculation. It feeds it, because suddenly everyone starts asking the same question. If there is nothing uncomfortable here, why does this tiny encounter feel so enormous? And this is where the easy interpretation begins falling apart. The obvious headline was a catfight. Lifestyle queen versus aspiring lifestyle mogul, two famous women supposedly fighting over the same domestic territory. Convenient, entertaining, and possibly completely missing the point, because Martha Stewart is not simply another woman selling recipes, television, entertaining ideas, and domestic aspiration. Martha Stewart is King Charles's friend. Martha Stewart met him in New York, attended the event, was photographed with him, spoke positively about the encounter afterward, and has openly shown warmth toward the working royals. Suddenly, that California dinner becomes very different. Suddenly, the person hearing about the private royal encounter is not some random celebrity seated across the room. She actually knows the man being discussed. So now the question becomes unavoidable. Was something from that private meeting between King Charles and Meghan Markle being casually discussed, or was Meghan Markle presenting a version of events that Martha Stewart found questionable? Because picture the sequence exactly as it unfolded. Meghan arrives back from Highgrove, the king's own Gloucestershire home, after an extraordinarily sensitive family encounter. It was reportedly the first time in more than 4 years that her father-in-law had seen his grandchildren. This was not staged for cameras. It was carefully arranged, deliberately private, and apparently intended to remain that way. Yet soon afterward, Meghan is sitting at a California dinner party, and the meeting is somehow being discussed within earshot of the one woman there who already has a personal connection to the king. Of every room, every dinner, every possible audience, that detail traveled through this one. And that is where the story becomes much bigger than gossip about cooking shows. Because according to the commentary surrounding the meeting, this was not being treated inside royal circles like some glorious reconciliation where every wound had magically disappeared. Questions remained about whether Meghan genuinely wanted to rebuild bridges with the UK or the royal family, while Harry appeared more invested in rehabilitating relationships and allowing the children to see their grandfather. Then, Tom Sykes focused on the detail others were racing past. Martha exchanged barely a couple of words with Meghan, yet Martha still knew she had been discussing the king. Think about the mechanics of that. If those two barely spoke, the information had to travel across the table, through another guest, through the room, and eventually into People magazine, which creates the question Montecito surely would rather nobody ask: whose house was this, who else was sitting there, and exactly how many people heard what was supposed to remain private? Because one thing is already clear, the story did not stay inside Highgrove. But just when that dinner party trail seemed explosive enough, a competing account appeared and complicated everything. A source claiming to have hosted the event insisted the description was simply untrue, saying they sat next to Meghan at the dinner party and disputing what had supposedly happened. Suddenly, this was no longer merely about gossip escaping a private table. Somebody was effectively challenging Martha Stewart's version of events, and that immediately created another uncomfortable question: who would risk contradicting Martha Stewart publicly, and why? Then the royal conversation widened because attention turned back toward that supposed olive branch with the family. If this really represented reconciliation, where was William? William was nearby playing polo and being photographed walking hand in hand with Catherine. If everyone genuinely intended to bury the hatchet and begin rebuilding relationships, surely that would have been the obvious opportunity. Yet William and Catherine were absent, and that absence was treated as evidence that the gulf inside the family remained enormous. Then came the detail that transformed the Highgrove meeting from an emotional family reunion into something that sounded almost painfully controlled. Harry, Meghan, both children, the king and the queen were finally together after years of distance, and the king apparently wanted the meeting to succeed so badly that the entire arrangement was surrounded by extraordinary secrecy. William and Catherine reportedly were not even told beforehand, but Camilla was there, and according to the commentary, Camilla's presence carried a purpose far beyond simply joining the family gathering. After years of competing recollections and public accusations, Camilla was supposedly there to ensure that nothing could later be remembered differently. Harry had attacked Camilla in his book, making the atmosphere even more delicate, and suddenly having another person inside that room looked less like casual family company and more like protection. Robert Jobson, who has covered this family for decades, described Camilla as emotional support for the king, but also emphasized something much more consequential: a witness. That single word changes the entire temperature of the meeting. Phil Dampier similarly argued that somebody needed to be present who could confirm exactly what was said. Think about what that implies. The king could not apparently sit privately with his own son and daughter-in-law without another pair of ears inside the room, not because cameras were rolling, not because this was a formal ceremony, but because trust had deteriorated so severely that even an intimate family conversation seemingly required somebody who could later verify what happened. Oprah, the book, and years of private exchanges becoming public had created an atmosphere where the palace already understood how differently conversations could eventually be presented. Recollections may vary suddenly sounded less like an old palace phrase and more like the shadow hanging over the entire meeting. There were reportedly precautions surrounding photographs as well. Meghan and Harry were said to have wanted pictures involving the king and the children, but those photographs were not allowed, while Camilla remained present despite claims that her presence was unwanted. The implication was extraordinary. Every potential image, every sentence, and every possible misunderstanding seemed to be treated as something requiring control. Even discussion about money was presented as a potential concern, with speculation about whether Harry's financial pressures could enter the conversation and whether his father might instinctively offer assistance. The meeting therefore appeared caught between two completely different realities: a father wanting to see his son and grandchildren, and a monarch seemingly unable to forget everything that had happened before. And then came the detail that made the California dinner look even more damaging. The king had allegedly taken precautions inside his own home with his own family, and only weeks later, Martha Stewart was publicly discussing the fact that Meghan had been talking about meeting him. That does not prove every allegation surrounding that dinner, but within the transcript's framing, it explains why the story exploded. The real wound was no longer a title, a television show, or a celebrity rivalry. It was trust, and once trust becomes the central question, every private conversation becomes another potential public story waiting to escape.